Continuing on, my mom, Claire, and my dad, Jack, they had this long-distance romance, and not by phone, because that really wouldn't have worked out back then. You could make phone calls, but they were extremely expensive. So it was by letter. It would be like, what do they call them, internet romances or whatever today, but there was, of course, no internet. And like I said, calls were very, very costly at the time. So it was by post. And you write a letter there, you write a letter back, write a letter there, write a letter back. And they got to know each other really well, as you could by writing a letter, you know. Then they decided they'd like to meet up, and this is where I think I left off. My mom being in California and my dad being in Maryland, quite a distance, and so my mom decided that she would catch a train, which was the common mode of travel, catch a train to Maryland. And so she got her tickets, got it all worked out, and headed off. And she went to Maryland and got there after that long train ride, which took, I believe it was several days to travel that distance. She made it, and she spent a few days back in Maryland, and I can't remember where she stayed exactly and where they stayed, but she and my dad always made it a point to point out there wasn't any hanky-panky while they were together. Well, Claire comes back to California. Jack stays where he is. He was an officer. He was doing teaching and so forth in the on the military base where he was, training other officers in certain things, other military training, because like I said, he was, you know, a relatively smart guy, and so they had him doing that. And because he had gone to college and was a college graduate, he was able to go in as an officer, and so that's where he was. My mom came back, and I believe she was staying in Victorville with my Aunt Ray, Auntie Ray, and her mom was also living with them. And so they were all three living together, and my mom continued with her job, and my aunt, of course, I believe, was teaching at the time in Victorville. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, and you know, we'll have to correct that. But this is from memory of hearing stories over and over and over and over again for years. But of course, I haven't heard those stories now for 25 some years. My mom's been dead, so about 25 years, I guess now. And finally, they decided that they liked each other, they loved each other, and they'd like to get married, and they wanted to get married. They were a little concerned because it was going into 1945, and there was scuttlebutt, that's rumors, that my dad would eventually be shipped over, his unit would be shipped into Japan, or shipped over to fight with Japan in the war. So they decided they were going to get married because, you know, they wanted to consummate their love for one another. Plus, you know, if he was going over and it was last days. He wanted to leave a legacy behind. And so they set a wedding date. So she got a wedding dress, and she looked very nice in her dress. I'll see if I can find some of the pictures of her and show those. But she looked very nice in her wedding dress. And of course, she ended up having to go back to Maryland because he couldn't come out. He could get a leave for a few days, but he couldn't come out to California to get married because this was war and they just didn't have all that much flexibility or freedom. And so she boarded a train once again. She got there, and my dad had rented an apartment because, you know, he was an officer and they had housing allowances, I guess, if they were married, and because he was going to get married, he could have an apartment off base, and then he and my mom could live together off base, and she would do odds and ends, you know, to make money and so forth for herself. So she goes back, he's there, and they end up getting married in a chapel on the base, I believe it was. That's what the pictures show. And his best man and I think the best woman was also either one of the wives or girlfriends of one of the fellas that she had met back there when she had been there to visit him earlier. So they get married and they have their little honeymoon romance, whatever, for the few days that he had leave for, and he goes back to working on the base. But again, they had moved, and so she had a place where she could be close to him and see him hopefully in the evenings when he came home, if he was allowed to. And that was the beginning of the Thompson clan that we're a part of. And they were married in early 1945, and my brother Blair, he was born in late 1945, December, and so they were able to have an offspring just in case, you know, he was going to go off to war and possibly lose his life there. But fortunately, we know that the war in Europe ended in May, and then the United States dropped an atomic bomb, and then another one in Japan in August of 1945. And that sort of ended the war. And he had to work on a little longer because a lot of servicemen did, but then he was eventually released from his military duty to go on and do whatever it was that he wanted to do.